Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Dan Clemens Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is September 4th in the year of the Lord 2017. Remember, we're hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And just pardon the video for today. I thought I had this set and I did not. The top of my hat's going to be right at the screen unless I really scrunch down, and that's going to be uncomfortable. I accidentally knocked over my camera stand. I was doing some work on the desk here, and I thought I had it set, and I don't. And I don't want to mess with it too much during the show, so you're just going to have to put up with the top of my head being right at the screen, as it were. Let me see if I can... Well, you know what? There, I can adjust that just a hair bit there. Okay, I didn't know I had enough room on my OBS, my open broadcast studio. And for those of you that are techie out there, that's what I use to produce the show. It's an open source broadcast studio. I was using XSplit, but it was so resource hoggish that it was unreal. As a matter of fact, they even tried it on this computer. Then all I do on this, my third computer, is produce the show on that, nothing else. And it still was up against my CPU and everything. And it's a decent i5, and it has a decent memory or RAM in it and everything. So I'm just going to stick with the Open Broadcast Studio. They have upgraded a lot of things on it. They've actually added a little bit of features to it. They're actually, I think the next thing they said they're going to work on, the next update, is giving more functionality for playing videos in Open Broadcaster. So hopefully that'll get that'll come along there. And but everything looks like it's working well. I switched my computers around a little bit. So when I'm reading articles, I'm not looking this way. I'll be looking more straight. I just sort of swapped. I have two monitors on my main computer that I do most of the show prep and or all the show prep on and everything. So it looks like everything's working well this morning. Hopefully you guys are having a great Labor Day weekend. I'm not one for celebrating Labor Day weekend for the reasons that a lot of folks do, because it was an appeasement to the violence that the unions were doing back when McKinley was president, and it was an appeasement to them to give them a national holiday to make them feel special. And I'm not one, you know my opinions if you listen to the show long enough about unions. And folks, this is the libertarian coming out of me. I don't care if you belong to a union or not. Just don't force it on me. And don't come into a state and tell the state that there can't be a right-to-work state. And I have a lot of liberal friends that have a lot of opinion about that. Well, if you live in a right-to-work state, no wonder why your wages are low. And my question to them, by whose standards? By what metric are you using? Because union wages are arbitrary. They just ask and strike and negotiate for higher wages that are higher than the market actually, if you had the free market actually working properly, they're way higher than what the market normally bears for those jobs. So the companies that employ unions, like the American Auto Workers and stuff, they have to pay, the last I looked, and this was a couple years ago, and it might have actually updated this, that their cost per hour, as far as wages for building an automobile, is somewhere, I was thinking it was like $109 or $110 an hour if you add everything in. And the non-union plants like are down south with Nissan, Toyota, and that, theirs are like $50 or $60 an hour. So there's a $40 difference, and their living wage down there, they're getting paid very well down in those plants. So I'm not a huge fan of unions. If you want to belong to a union, that's fine. I'm not going to disparage you for that because you have a freedom of association. But don't come at me and tell me that unions are the best thing since sliced bread and that they've done everything, like give us a 4 or 5 day week and weekends and stuff like that, because that's absolutely not true. If you go back into history and find out where those actually came from, it was innovations by Henry Ford to entice workers to his plants about the 5 day work week. the 40-hour week, the weekend, the whole thing. It was not unions that forced that. It was not unions that brought those about. They were like the band director that jumps in front of the band at the end of the parade and says he led the parade all the way through. So that's my little spiel about Labor Day. And I do, like I said, I don't take this holiday off for broadcasting. I've done this for years now, that unless we were camping, but usually haven't done that in many, many moons. This is what I do. This is what I do here. We had a good time Friday, my wife and myself. It was our actual anniversary date, or day, and we did make a small day of it. We slept in. I mean, we got my daughter up and ready for her program, and we both got on the recliners and went back to sleep. And then we got up and went out to Knoebels Amusement Park. I don't ride rides anymore because of my neck. I'm afraid I'm going to injure it. So we just walk around. It's nice to see, look at people and look at the rides and they have wood carving displays out there and things for sale. So we just like going to see those things. And we hadn't had one in years, so we got a banana split, and we shared it. And so that was very, very good. And that was our day. That was our anniversary day, because we'd spent the previous Tuesday going on a boat ride and having a good lunch at Red Lobster, so that was our meal. So we do that from time to time. We don't always celebrate everything on the date of our anniversary. So I thank you for indulging me on Friday. My numbers did not fall off over the weekend. I do appreciate that on Blog Talk Radio. I appreciate that. And I do have the chat rooms open in YouTube and Blog Talk Radio. And so let's get over here. I know the most of the time on Labor Day weekend, people go camping. But you got the next weekend, and you put off some of your stuff on the honey-do list. If you like what you hear on the show, please go over to danclemenshow.com. That's my show notes page, and click on the Sears Parts Direct widget. You'll get 10% off of all your lawnmower parts and equipment. I bought lawnmower parts there myself. The last part I bought was for my gas cook stove in the kitchen. I needed an electronic igniter for the oven, and I ordered it. I got it in 2 days. I paid for the quicker shipping, but I got it when they told me I was supposed to get it. It was a good price for it. Matter of fact, if you compared the two igniters, the original igniter that came with it was a wimp compared to the one they gave me. The one they gave me was substantially beefier, and it works great. So if you're the handyman in the house and you got a honey-do list that has things that need fixed and you need parts, you can get a 10% discount on this by going over to the danclemenshow.com and entering the offer code on the widget on the page. Take you right over to Sears Part Direct, and you have a fantastic time doing it. I highly recommend these folks because this is a service I use also. All right. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Psalms, chapter 40, verses 20 through 23. And this is one that I actually was reading through this morning, and I thought this was very applicable to the show that I set up today. And the show title I set up today is Coveting and Envy Leads to Socialism. And we're going to talk about this because one of the things, real quick before I do the Bible reading, unions, if you look at how unions are run, and how hard it is to get somebody fired, that's not doing their work. This is very, very close to what socialism is. It's I call it one of the last bastions of organized social or communism in this country. The American unions. Okay. Psalms chapter 94 verses 20 through 23. Shall the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law, have fellowship with you? They gather together against the life of the righteous, and they condemn innocent blood. But the Lord has been my defense, and my God, the rock of my refuge. He has brought on them their own iniquity. They shall cut them off in their own wickedness. The Lord our God shall cut them off. The first verse there. Shall the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law. One of the things that I continue to say about the Supreme Court in the United States of America is they are not the final arbiter of what is or is not the Constitution. That's we the people, through our elected representatives. We can change the law through them as long as it is within the constitutional constraints. And a couple of things, abortion, homosexual marriage, those things are outside the constraint or outside the jurisdiction, in my opinion, of the Supreme Court. And they've, by the edicts of the Supreme Court, they've quantified these into law, these evils that are in the law. And so you can't tell me that all law is good, because it's not, especially law that's devised by man that goes against God's commandments. Today's quote meal comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson. I read some of his stuff in high school, and I liked his On Walden's Pond. I thought that was a great read, and I highly recommend Mr. Emerson for some light reading. At what greater calamity can fall upon a nation than the loss of worship? Amen. Today's short Bible lesson is Pretending, aka Hypocrisy, by Bill Jackson over at gewatkins.net. Really good article on that. And I never really thought about this that way, but yes, pretending to be something you're not is hypocrisy. And that goes right along with what I'm going to be talking about today, about these socialists in this country, folks that support socialism, especially quote-unquote Christians out there who support socialism. It's just amazing to me. It really is. It's amazing to me how these folks can look at the scriptures and read the scriptures and say that socialism is okay when the basis of socialism is a sin. And we'll talk about that. Real quick here, since today's Labor Day, I always do this on Labor Day. Unions aren't as popular as polls would have you to believe, and this is by Charles W. Bard over at Foundation for Economic Education. And basically what Mr. Bard is saying here, he said on Wednesday, August 30th of 2017, Gallup issued a new poll on public attitudes toward labor unions. It reported that 61% of those polled approved of labor unions. Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO, cited the poll as a cause for a happy early Labor Day. 61% of those polled approved of labor unions. Mr. Trumka actually has little to be happy about this Labor Day. Don't be misled by the polls. Now, this is something that's a drumbeat of mine on social media, especially on Facebook and Twitter, when these people cite these polls, especially when they don't jive with the actual, like the Trump polls during the 2016 presidential election. I kept saying that the polls had Hillary way up in the polls and Donald Trump way down, but if you go to his rallies, it was standing room only inside, and it was an overflow on the outside. But you go to Hillary rallies, and you could barely have enough people to fill the front row, relatively speaking. And so I made this prediction on the show that then Donald Trump, candidate, was going to win the presidential election no matter what the polls said, just by looking at the sheer numbers. And this is exactly the same thing. You have the polls saying that 61% of Americans approve of labor unions, but that doesn't jive with the numbers. Unions only have about 10.7% of all American workers, and only 6.4% of private sector workers are union members. Now, just a few years ago, that was like 14 or 15%. I'm talking maybe 2010, 2011. I didn't go back in and look at the actual dates here. Let's see here. The last time that they were close to 15% were, well, right between 97 and before they dropped down to close to 10% was like 2011, 2012, that were somewhere still up there closer to 15%, according to this chart that I have on here. And like I said, all these links are over in the show notes page. Will be there right after the show. So to me, he doesn't have anything to celebrate. Yeah, the poll says this, but the actual numbers, if only 10.7% of all American workers are part of a union, and they say 61% of the Americans approve of labor unions. Now, I don't approve of them, but neither do I want to discourage folks from being members of unions. It's called freedom of association, folks. They can be that if they want. Okay, but I don't approve of unions personally. Okay, and I just wanted to point that out again about how the polls can be just really, really And they've been consistent. The approval rating for these polls have been consistent from 1985 to 2017, between 60 and back in 2009, 2010, they dropped just below 50%. So they've been pretty persistent. Gallup has in these union approval rates, but again, I want to see the metrics. I want to see the question, and that's a lot of times you don't see this. They don't give all those things out, so you don't know who they're, what the group they were talking about, how many folks were. I was looking down through here, and I did not see their sampling. Yeah, I tried to see their sampling. Or just, so you don't know. Again, you can't trust the polls unless they give all those metrics. You really can't. So that's just my little hat tip to the unions and how minuscule part of the workforce they actually are, and how little power. I mean, they still wield great power because they have money. They can put money in politics. Citizens United guaranteed that, but what really offset the unions was the corporations can do the same thing as unions. And I'm still reading that book, The Intimidation Game. And folks, the way Ms. Strassel has laid this out, it's honestly, folks, most of the arguments she puts forth in that book, I don't know why there's not more people in jail over this. Especially Lois Lerner. She should do some hard time over this. Not country club time. She should do some hard time over this, messing with the American elections the way she did. It's just, it was unreal. So, all right, now getting into the topic of the show today, coveting and envy leads to socialism. Now these are, or covetousness, or to covet somebody else's possessions, and being envious of somebody that has something you don't have. And a lot of people try to spin that sometimes. Well, you have an enviable life. That I'm envious of your life. That's really not. There's no way to really take envy and spin it to be good. There really isn't. And so these two things, coveting and envy, always lead to socialism. They always do. And I have this article here by Faith Facts. Now, it doesn't say who actually authored it, but the title of it is Socialism is Not Compassionate and Why This Should Matter to Christians. And this is something that I talk about a lot on this show here, and I try to explain to folks on social media about this, where socialism is not compassionate and why this should matter to Christians. Now, most people that I talk to on social media have a misconception of what compassion is. They think what the government does through social services and that is compassionate. And it really isn't. They misdefine what compassion is. A lot of Christians who think the same way, and I met brethren in the church that think this way, that think it's okay to have government compassion this way. They're not thinking it through, because as Christians, we're not told to go to the government. We're not told to go to the government and set up a program and have them exercise our compassion for us. And that's exactly what government compassion is. It's the government exercising compassion that the people should be exercising on their own, or not exercising on their own if they do not choose to. There's some freedoms that are being taken away and taken for granted. Taken away by government and taken for granted by folks out there. As Christians, we're commanded to be compassionate. We have an example of Jesus Christ being compassionate. When he was out in the wilderness talking to the 4,000 and the 5,000, he didn't want to send them away hungry. He had compassion upon them. And he said so in, the book of Matthew and the Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark. And he had compassion on them to the point that he actually fed them. And they took up several baskets from each outing of the remains of the fish and the bread. So Jesus had compassion. But Jesus didn't go to the Roman government and say, hey, look, I got these 4,000 people out here. They're going to starve to death, or they're really hungry now, and I don't want to turn them away in case they faint in the way and they injure themselves. Can you help me and help me feed these people? He didn't do that. Jesus Christ did that himself as an example for us in our compassion. So when you say that the government is compassionate, like I said, they're doing something that you should rightly be doing yourself, and they're overstepping the boundaries in case somebody out there, and is this a personal decision for folks? If they want to be compassionate with their money and help the needy and stuff like that, that is a personal decision for folks that they have to make. Hopefully they're compassionate where they'll help folks. But again, that's their choice. When government does that, they have no choice because they take our tax dollars and do this compassionate work for us. I just want to read the beginning part, and then he makes a bunch of points. I'm just going to go over the points real quick as I go down through. Christians should care about politics because ultimately we care about people. Government has an increasingly large influence on our lives, on the lives of people, thus we cannot ignore politics. Further, almost every law reflects someone's idea of morality. That's key there, folks. Since God's morality is ultimate and universal, society benefits from the Christian's participation in the public square. That is, society benefits when biblical truth is reflected in law. What we encounter in discussing societal issues today with Christians is that many think socialism is good. In fact, they think it is distinctly compassionate, but thus truly moral. In this essay, we will examine why socialism and its compadres, Marxism and liberalism, are in fact immoral and inhumane. Conservatism and capitalism, on the other hand, not only objectively produce better results for society, but are the most moral. Okay? When I was younger, and let me stop the reading here real quick here. When we're talking about capitalism and conservatism, and how they are objectively produce better results for society and are the most moral, this is where the fork in the road goes with a lot of folks that want government compassion. Because they see capitalists as being stingy. They see capitalists as not paying their fair share. Okay? But they never dig down the numbers. You never ask them, well, what is their fair share? What are the numbers? Please give them to me. They never dig down into that. They always say, they're just not paying their fair share. When in fact, conservatives, and especially folks that deal in free market capitalism, are more disposed, or predisposed, let's say, to giving to charity, to giving to the needy. And why? Because they have the wherewithal to do so. And there's a lot of charities out there that are being funded by rich folks, by capitalists. The Hunts Foundation out in Utah, I think it's around Salt Lake City. I've given to them in the past their cancer research, and they do fantastic work out there. And Mr. Hunt was the inventor of the styrofoam that used to get your hamburgers in to keep them warm. And he invented all these different things and got patents on them, and his family became rich. And basically what he did, and this is a real short story with him, and this is, I don't think it's unique to him, but his is a public story. He gave each of his children a certain amount of dollars, and it wasn't a lot. It was a couple $100,000, and he said, "That's all you're going to get because I'm giving the rest of the way, to projects and like cancer research, stuff like that." And as far as I can find out, back then, this was years ago that I looked into this, his kids were perfectly fine with that. His kids were raised to not expect to have this fortune bestowed on them because their dad had, these Christian ideas of philanthropy and wanted to give it away as far as, research and needs and stuff like that. And that's all well and good. But I just wanted to make that point there that the anti-freedom folks out there, they have a dim view of capitalism, but if it wasn't for capitalism, they wouldn't have all this wealth that they're coveting and envious of. To redistribute this to the poor or needy as they see fit, not as the individual who made the money sees fit. That's very distinct. That's a distinction that needs to be made here. I'm just looking down through here. Good morning. I got a guest in the Blog Talk Radio chat room. AK Cog. Good morning. How you doing today? Hope you enjoyed the show, by the way. He goes on to say, when I was younger and filled with idealism, I embraced socialism. But over time, as I studied the evidence and really thought it through, I realized that my thinking was mushy. Truth became more important to me than my faulty idealism. I moved away from liberalism and socialism. First, let's define our terms. Socialism is government-mandated activities or government control of assets. Marxism is using the power of the state to take money from some groups of citizens and give it to other groups. Redistribution of wealth or social justice. Liberalism is a broader term that encompasses both of the above. Progressivism and statism are synonyms of liberalism. Because there is so much overlap, we will use these terms more or less interchangeably. 10 reasons why liberalism is not only ineffective, but indeed immoral and inhumane. I'm just going to go down through the reasons real quick because I have some other articles I want to get to. But one, redistribution of wealth is not justice, it is theft. Now you think about that. I'm not going to go into depth on these, but you think about that. Redistribution of wealth is not justice, it is theft. You have to take it from somebody to give it to somebody else. And I do mean take with force. 2, socialism and Marxism reduce our freedoms, thus leading to tyranny. And this is something that a lot of the folks in the anti-freedom crowd do not understand. They just do not understand this. That it reduces freedoms and leads to tyranny. Now they think just the opposite. It'll free people up to do what they want. No, because you're going to have force to do number one, redistribute wealth. You need force to do that, which leads to less freedom and less liberty and leads to tyranny. 3, when the government redistributes wealth, it even hurts the people it's trying to help. And this has been study after study after study has been done on this, on the welfare state, and how there's people out there, it does not make generational welfare, folks. And it absolutely does. And there's a lot of folks that came out of welfare, like, I can't remember her first name. Last name Star, Star Parker, Star Parker, that's her first name. Star Parker came out of this generational welfare and become a very productive, capitalistic, if I can say this, member of society. So it does hurt the people it's trying to help. Matter of fact, you look up in Seattle, Washington, they passed the law of the $15 minimum wage. Well, a lot of these folks, they don't want to lose their welfare benefits, so they're crying to their employers, since they're making more dollars an hour, which was the goal here, an arbitrary number, by the way. And I don't even think they reached the $15 an hour, and these folks have to cut back how many hours a week they work in order to keep the welfare benefits. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. If they're making a good wage and they're supposed to be able to live off this wage, why do they still need welfare? So it's a very just convoluted way of thinking here. Number 4, every time the government gets involved in something, in the long run, it hurts the economy. And every time, folks, the government, I've advocated for this on the show for many, many years, that there should be, a separation of government and economy. There really should be. The government should not be doing anything with the economy other than taxes. That's the only thing. They shouldn't be investing any money in failed projects like Solaris and all these other green energy companies that went belly up after they got millions of dollars of taxpayer money. Matter of fact, there's a lot of things, and some people disagree with me on this, but there's a lot of things the government does, and Hurricane Harvey and other hurricanes in the past and floodings in the past have illustrated this greatly to me with the National Flood Insurance Program, that they keep rebuilding in these floodplains. And the American taxpayer keeps having to bail them out. President Trump's talking about I think it was a $7 billion emergency funds package, to help Houston and other areas around Houston recover. And again, a lot of the damage is being done there is because people built where they shouldn't have been building. And they actually need to relocate. Now, whether they're going to do that or not is anybody's guess, but they don't have the fiduciary incentive to do so. If they had just private insurance without the government backing them up, the insurance companies would pay for the first time, but the insurance companies come back and say, not a second time. So you need to make some decisions if you're going to stay in here or rebuild elsewhere. Take the money and rebuild elsewhere, and and just tear that old house down, get it out of the flood zone. So every time the government gets involved in something, in the long-term run, it hurts the economy. Number 5, socialism reduces the incentive to innovate and produce. Obamacare, perfect example. Innovation in medical sciences and procedures and apparatuses and appliances and stuff like that had slowed tremendously under Obamacare. And it's because there wasn't any incentives to innovate, because they just weren't getting the money they were before, because they're being taxed on these implements and these not the procedures, but the IV bottles or whatever, all these apparatuses that go along with the medical profession. 6, study shows that the government is much less efficient at the same tasks as private enterprises or charity. Absolutely the case. Absolutely the case. I encourage you to go watch John Stossel. He does good research in this area, puts out good facts in these areas. There are some cities down in North Carolina that they turned all of their public works over to private enterprise, and they saved the taxpayer dollars, and the work got done better, and everything is so much better. Garbage pickup, the water. We have Sunbury, PA, is city water, okay, and the city runs that. But outside the Sunbury, Northumberland, and I'm not sure about Selinsgrove now, but I do know Northumberland is a privately owned, and those folks get good service out of them. Throughout, you get beyond Snydertown and out in the coal region, there's a big, and they changed the name so many times I can't remember. It used to be Roaring Creek Water, and it's Aqua something now. But they actually have water going out to houses in the country that they're supplying. Now, I don't know any municipality that would take it beyond their city limits to offer water. And we're talking about private versus public, okay? Socialism rewards failure. Now, get back to the union example. I know a lot of people that are members of unions. My son absolutely is a member of a union, or actually a member of the union down at the railroad union. And I asked him about that before, and he said, yeah, there's some people there that really, if it would have been any other place other than union place, they'd be fired. And I said, well, don't you see anything wrong with that? That the union's able to keep these folks on that are a drag on the company. And so socialism actually rewards failure. The takeover, the TARP money for like General Motors and Chrysler, they failed. They should have been let to fail completely, go through the bankruptcy. That's what we're there. And no one knows. To this day, you ask people, oh, that was a good thing. TARP money for GM and Chrysler was a good thing. Well, prove it to me. Well, we still have them. But what would have happened if they were to go away? What happens if they were to went through bankruptcy? And this is what the unions are really pushing not to get done, because if they'd have went through bankruptcy, the unions would have took a big hit on that and the restructuring stuff like that. And I don't think GM and Chrysler would have went the way of the dodo bird. I think they would have been downsized a little bit, and I think they would have come back even stronger. And I would have respected them more if they would have not taken the TARP money. I mean, Ford was pressured to try to take the TARP money, and they said, no, we're solvent enough. We can take this money from other divisions and prop up the American division. And they survived the whole thing. And none of the foreign car makers took the TARP money. And then there is another example. What happens if, let's say, GM would have went belly up? All their assets would have been sold off to somebody to pay the creditors in an outright liquidating bankruptcy, which means who would buy up these plants? Well, probably other automakers that were still solvent. Honda was actually buying up a bunch of GM plants before the 2008 recession. They were closing down these plants, trying to, boost their capital, and be more efficient and stuff like that. And Honda was buying a bunch of them in Ohio. Someone would have bought them, folks. They actually would have. Number 8, socialism and Marxism ultimately lead to financial destruction. Nowhere in the world has socialism and Marxism succeeded in creating a society that's self-sustaining monetarily. Nowhere. Venezuela, they're on their way out, as history would show. They're definitely on their way out, and it doesn't work. Anywhere it's been practiced, it does not work. History proves that. Okay. 9, liberalism destroys the rule of law. This one here, I got to read this a little bit. America is the heir, H-I-E or H-E-I-R, of the rule of law, which originated with the Hebrews in ancient times. America's Constitution is quite clear that there are specific enumerated powers of the federal government, and all powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. The liberal agenda in legislation and court rulings has openly ignored the Constitution. Considering federal health care legislation, there is absolutely no authority in the Constitution to force people to buy something that they do not want. Yet other legislatures could care less. When the rule of law is destroyed, despotism takes over. And that's exactly right. So liberalism destroys the rule of law. Number 10, liberalism not only breeds hatred, but it indeed contributes to people's death. And again, because liberalism is a relativistic worldview, some people are ultimately expendable. We see this in every leftist government, but fail to make the connection to the ideology at home. Look at Venezuela. How many people have disappeared? I'm not saying they're killed, but they are actually arresting the wives of the men that are the dissidents, in their opinion, and hold them as political prisoners. And so this unrest that's caused by socialism in Venezuela is causing the death of people. There are people actually died over this already. So, and he goes on to say, down here, this last little section I want to read here, objections considered. The socialists may object to these arguments by saying, but wait, people have rights. For example, in the current healthcare debate, we hear that people have a right to healthcare. But this is incorrect. Healthcare is not a right, it's a goods or service, like food, clothing, shelter, or life insurance. And the way to distribute these things that is the least expensive to the consumer with the best quality is through private enterprise. The free exchange of goods and services is the most moral and the most effective means of distribution. America's Declaration of Independence is an historic document that philosophically defines rights. Rights are God-given to personhood rather than something conferred by governments. In practice, life is a right. A good or a service is not a right. And he is absolutely right here. I've been talking about this. You cannot take somebody else's labor and say, and my son has this idea, and I don't know where he got this from. My son has this idea. I said, what happens if nobody wants to go to school to become a doctor anymore? Can the government force them to be doctors if they're going to school saying, well, the only schooling you can take is to become a doctor because we need doctors? And my son said, yes, because healthcare is a right. And I said, there you go. I said, that's the error in your argument. You're using force to make people do something they may not want to do. So it's a good read. I encourage you to go over and read that. Like I said, it'll be over the show notes page at the DanClementShow.com. I got to read a comment here. Yeah, a commenter on my Blog Talk Radio is talking about a good move with Trump on the VA. Yeah, I mean, anything to help our veterans. I mean, goodness gracious. We asked these folks to go to a war for us and kill people and break things, but we don't take care of them when they come home, and they're like a second thought to anybody else. All right, let me see which one I want to go to here real quick. Well, I have there's a bunch of articles I have in here. I got one I'm not going to really read, but it is a good read. It's over at Tea Party America blog post. Now this post is clear back in October 2009, but thou shalt not covet, a command against socialism. And I was thinking hard about this over the weekend, how socialism is being envious of somebody else and coveting what somebody else has. And this is absolutely the basis for socialism and communism. It's coveting somebody else's stuff and being envious of what they have. It really, really is. I have some other good articles down here about envy is a powerful political motivation by Kevin Craig. Now, he was running for a Missouri, I'm not sure if it was for the federal government, for the state. I didn't really look. But he has a good article there about envy, powerful political motivation. There's another one over Christian forums that says envy, covetousness, jealousy, and charity, and it's a discussion in philosophy, and doesn't have a name other than like a pen name. Bricklayer was the person that put it out on September 25th, 2010. Good, it makes some good points in that. They really do. I want to read this one because I'm interested in the generations that are coming up after me. And I have this article here by Lauren Goodman over at teentherapyoc.com. And basically it's liberals or social media and negative character traits in teens. And I thought this was a good read here. It's a very short one. It's only 1 page long. I'm going to read this to you because I thought Lauren was fantastic in this. Teenagers use Instagram and Snapchat all the time. Some of them use Facebook too, but mostly hear about Insta and Snapchat. These are good tools for communication. They allow people to enjoy seeing what their friends are up to, which can be fun. More often than not, I'm hearing about hurt feelings as a result of these apps. Teens that are constantly on these apps covet what their friends have. They covet the highlight reel of friends with boyfriends or girlfriends, friends with other friends, friends with good family relationship, friends doing fun things, friends being recognized as for achievements. They also covet their friends' bodies, clothes, other material possessions. It's an endless game of your teenager comparing him or herself and thinking he or she doesn't measure up. Covetousness is an ugly character trait. It seems harmless at first. Initially, your teenager simply wishes he or she had what they have. Then he or she feels discontented, with what he or she has. Then he or she begins to envy. From there flows a desire to take shortcuts. Shortcuts lead to lying, cheating, stealing, and impatience. This is the mark of someone who needs instant gratification to be happy. People who live like that remind me of Esau from the Old Testament in the Bible. Esau traded everything that came with the ancient Israelite tradition of being the firstborn son for a meal. He was hungry, so he chose instant gratification. Your child wants to be loved, so he or she becomes willing to be sexual with someone at a party instead of putting in all the work it takes to have a meaningful, loving relationship. Yes, I know this is an extreme example, but covetous character really does lead to shortcuts, which can ultimately lead to a very hard road. I'm not blaming social media for the poor character traits of covetousness. That is something that comes from instant gratification. I will tell you, though, that the teenage clients that I see who don't really struggle with this also don't spend much time on social media. While there isn't causation, there does seem to be correlation. Just like drinking soda every day correlates to obesity, using social media appears to correlate to an envious character. There's an old adage that if you want to be thin, hang out with thin people. If you want to be wealthy, hang out with wealthy people. Well, if you want a strong character, do what people with strong characters do. They use social media a little bit, but they don't live on it. They don't allow themselves to become so wrapped up in it that they start comparing what they see with their own lives. People of strong character simply tend to be busy doing other things than wishing they had what someone else has. I want this for our teenager too. I want your teen to develop sound character so that he or she will be a positive contribution to this world instead of someone that whines because life has been hard or unfair. Helping teams grow and families improve connection. And this is one of the downsides of social media, especially with our younger folks. And this is something that me and my wife has experienced in our life. Growing up, getting married, having kids, living in houses, we haven't always lived in the best houses. be quite frankly. We've never owned a new house. We've owned one new car in our life, and that was okay. That was an okay experience. We never owned a new house, never had brand new furniture, with the exception of a few pieces like our recliners, and we're getting ready to buy a couch here pretty soon. But for the most of our married life, we've had used furniture, hand-me-down furniture that was in really good shape, and the reason people were getting rid of it was they were getting new stuff, and we're like, well, what's wrong with this? Well, they're changing their style or whatever, and they were contemporaries of ours. And we come to find out later that some of our contemporaries got in some huge financial problems because everything they owned was on credit. And so they were just trying to keep up with the Joneses, and so everything that they owned was on credit. Their Christmases, the one couple I remember they were bragging about, that they spent $3,000 or $4,000 at Christmas. And I was like, I was taken aback. And I said, how do you pay for that? Well, we put on credit cards and we paid over time. And they were the one couple that really got in trouble because something happened with one of their jobs and everything snowballed. They were so up against the limit of their credit that their whole paychecks were going to pay bills, utility bills, mortgages, credit cards. And so all it needed was one glitch to send the house of cards crashing. And we looked at each other and we're like, me and my wife were like, oh, we thank God we're not like that. A long time. We've been married 33 years, was our 33rd anniversary on Friday. And we've never put anything under the Christmas tree that wasn't already paid for. Now, we're big fans of layaway and stuff like that, where we can, buy a little bit bigger ticket item and put it over time. But once it hits underneath the tree, it's paid for. And we don't go all out paying, getting presents for, in-laws and nieces and nephews and all that kind of stuff. We just never got into that, and there's some people that do, but we just never got into that. We took care of our family. We had our family Christmases. We'd get, presents for, I got two sets of parents, my mom and stepdad, my dad, my stepmom, and then my wife's parents. And we'd always try to get them a little something, or my wife would make something crafty to send to them, and that meant a lot to my family, my family side, and also to her parents too. But I see kids nowadays, and like I said, this is happening with us in my generation. They wanted now what it took their parents 30, 40 years to accumulate. A nice home, a nice car, nice furniture, and everything. Most people start off with very little: used cars, used furniture, used house, and they build themselves up from there. But a lot of our friends that we know, and a couple of them actually got divorced over this because they had money issues and they weren't where they thought they should be. And again, they wanted instant gratification. It's just like Lauren says here, and she's a therapist. I'm not sure she's an MFT, but she's some type of teen therapist and stuff like that, and she makes a lot of sense in here. These kids want this instant gratification. They don't want to have to work for it. And quite frankly, you can extrapolate this out to socialism and communism. These people want what somebody else has without having to work for it. So what do? They go to the government and say, hey, this is unfair that these people live high on the hog over here and we're struggling over here. But I have never yet had a socialist or communist come to me and tell me that, give me the history of this person you're envious of and you're coveting their stuff. What is their history? Were they like you at one time? Were they struggling? And I'm not saying they got lucky or anything. A lot of people work hard for what they have, and they build things and they make things happen. And they do fantastic in their life, financially, spiritually, relationshiply. They're very well off in their life with all this stuff. And so I got to ask again, and I've asked this before of some folks, I said, do you know their history? Where did they come from? And the problem with a lot of socialists and communists, they look at the 1% here in the United States. And they look at it as something being static. These people become 1%ers and they sit back and they stay there. But there is a lot of income mobility in and out of the 1%. And a matter of fact, if you take America on the world scale of incomes, we're pretty high up there as Americans. Even the poorest of us in the United States, I know a lot of poor people have 2 TVs and a computer and cell phones, and they barely have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of. And there's people dying. And I'm not joking about this. There's literally people dying to get in the United States to be poor, because they see the benefit of living in a semi-capitalist free market society. The government has tried its darndest to choke out capitalism and free markets in this country, but guess what? They continue to thrive. They continue to thrive in this country. And people can't figure that out. People think that they're rigging the system. You know, these folks that are against corporations and that think that corporations are bad, they don't realize that the vast majority of corporations in this country are mom and pop companies. They're family-owned farms. You know, they don't have, $100 billion, payrolls or incomes as a corporation. Those corporations are few and far in between. The vast majority of corporations that are made up here in the United States are very small, either family or partnership type corporations. And yet what happens with socialists and communists out there, Marxists, whatever you want to call them, liberals, is they want to lump all corporations in together and say they're all bad. So they need their money confiscated from them at the point of a gun, because that's exactly what they're talking about, because they think that they have an advantage over everybody else. And I keep telling them that I've never worked for a poor person. I work for Mohawk Flush Doors. They're owned by Masonite. Matter of fact, they used to be family owned years ago, back in the early 90s when I worked for them for about a year. But they were sold, and Masonite's a corporation. And I wouldn't be able to work for them if they weren't making money. If they don't make money, they can't hire and keep employees. It's just that simple. And so these folks, and Christians really tick me off about this the most, because I am a Christian and I don't think this way. And I know the Bible doesn't support socialism or communism, because every command in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, talks about taking care of. If you see somebody naked, if you see somebody that's hungry or needs, a place to stay, you take care of it. The example of the Good Samaritan. You had the Levite and the priest walk the other side of the road, and you had the Samaritan come up, bind this guy's wounds, cleans his wounds, take him to the next town, puts him up at an inn, and tells the innkeeper, here's some money for his upkeep while he's healing, and if it costs more than this, when I come back, I'll pay you. He didn't go to the government and say, hey, we need to start a program so we can go back out on this road and collect this guy up and take care of him and use the tax dollars of all the Israelites in the area. It just didn't happen that way. And not in the Bible it doesn't. And the problem, and I know I'm winding down here a little over 5 minutes, one of the biggest problems I see is this whataboutism that's going on in this country. I sometimes I do it myself, but I use it more as examples, not as an excuse. But this whataboutism, well, what about this? The private charity or citizens cannot take care of these needs like the federal government can. How do you know? What happened? What happened to these people before the welfare state? They weren't dying in droves. They weren't dying in the millions. Were they living high on the hog? No, but people were helping them. Families, there used to be generations of families living under one roof. But since the state got involved with all this welfare and everything, we don't have that anymore. We don't have that anymore. And it's a shame. It's a real shame. And I'm part of the problem too. Now, we've offered our house to parents. They don't want it. Well, I'm taking my mom and my stepdad. They have everything financially covered. They do not want to live with their kids, and you know what? That's up to them. That's fine. And the same way with my wife's parents. They got everything pretty well situated. Where, my mother-in-law's in a nursing home now. She's in a nursing home because you couldn't handle her at home here. You really couldn't. With her weight and everything, it would be nigh on impossible. So she needs more help than what we need. But it used to be that parents, as long as they could, they stayed with their children. There was generations underneath one household. It used to be people could afford a doctor, but it wasn't until the government and regulations got involved that made it so expensive that you had to get insurance to help you pay for the bills, especially the unexpected bills. And so there's a tyranny that's going on in this country, especially this country, where there's people that think socialism and communism is a good thing, these democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders, and that the government should pay for education, medical, the whole. He's still a one payer health system, health insurance system. And I keep getting this argument thrown at me. Well, these other industrialized countries, they do it. Why can't we? Well, my question is, should they be doing it? Is this something that they rightfully should be doing? Is taking care of their citizens from the cradle to the grave, and how much is that costing? Everybody looks to the Nordic example over there. Now, the Nordic example is a skewed example that Bernie Sanders gave during the last presidential election cycle, because their economy is free market, but yet they have a huge safety net, and they tax the people upwards of 70%. So you make $100, the government gets 70 of that, and you get to keep 30. Woo-hoo! Boy, that's good, isn't it? But you have all this social stuff. What happens you don't? There are people literally, and I bet you the vast majority of people, I think there's more people than not, that go through their life with very minimal health issues, that they could pay out of pocket for their preventive medicine, their doctors, and all that kind of stuff. They could. And yet, we have government regulations, we have states stepping in, we have the insurance companies that, these very expensive policies and stuff. And again, why? Because you have a bunch of people that think it's compassionate for the government to do the work that they should be doing themselves. And they care about people they don't even know. They care about people they don't even know their situations about. They're just saying, well, what if, or what about? Okay, what if, what about? You come upon that, you take care of it. You can't, get a group of people together that can. Our church does it all the time. There's a lot of churches around the area that do the same thing all the time. They do charitable work. And trust me, I tell you, we get a lot further with the folks as far as getting them on their own 2 feet and supporting themselves than government agencies do. And I bet you if you look and do a study on charitable, private charity, that is the case almost all the time with private charity. And it just amazes me how in this time and age, this day and age, we have so many people that are pretenders. They pretend to be compassionate, and the only way they can get away with that is their compassion comes from the federal government and nowhere else. So, I think they're hypocrites. I think they're fakes and phonies that want the government to do their compassionate work for them and are envious of other people and envious of what they're doing and what they have, to be quite honest with you folks. Well, that's the end of the show. That's the music coming on there. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank AK Cog for being here. Appreciate it. We have someone from area code 201 listening. I didn't see a hand go up there, but we don't take phone calls anymore because of some of the things that happened in the past. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. And remember, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, and God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow at noon.